We are going to look at the history of General Jackson Kimeu Mulinge. When you look at the history of Mulinge, I may find it also good to talk about the history of the Kenya Army. Kenya Army was inherited from the British Army. During that time, the British Army was known as King's African Rifle. So when Kenya Army started off, it started off as Kenya Rifles. We had an Air Force, we had a Navy, but they were too small to factor in. Currently, I think a good percentage of the Kenya Defense Forces is in the Navy and the Air Force. But those days, Army alone contributed to over 95% of the number of soldiers. Now, when the British Army or the King's African Rifle left Kenya, they had so many soldiers from all over the Commonwealth. So when they left Kenya, Kenya had a skeleton army. So that is why you find the camp that they had at Kahawa, which was called Kahawa Garrison, was too big for the military. It was too big for the military, and so it was divided into two. One was remained as Kahawa Barracks, and the other one became Kenyatta College. Kenyatta College then later became Kenyatta University College, and today it is known as Kenyatta University. Now, that is how, and that is why Kenyatta University is next to Kahawa Barracks. On his part, Mulinge was one day walking around, looking after his parents' herd. And when he was looking after them around Machakos town, he found that there were some people who were being recruited into the military. The recruiting officer saw his body frame and walking style and concluded that this fellow can make a good soldier. He joined the military, King's African Rifles. He rose through from recruit, and as I've said, that Kahawa Barracks used to be the King's African Rifle. He was at one time of the same rank and even worked with, you remember during Mamau time, Idi Amin Dada was in Kenya. So at one time, they were both majors before independence. After independence, the Kenya Army was headed by the Kenya Rifles was now under President Jomo Kenyatta, and the army commander was called Brigadier Hadi. Brigadier Hadi was the army commander. Below Brigadier we have a full colonel, but we did not have a full colonel then. We had a few lieutenant colonels, around 3 or 4. One of them was deputizing the brigadier. Just like when you are in the district, we have a lot of DOs, and the DO1, the most senior DO, stays at the district headquarters. So the most senior lieutenant colonel was Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Kimeu Mulinge. He was the deputy army commander, but a lieutenant colonel. And among the other lieutenant colonels, one was called Lieutenant Colonel Ndolo. One was called Ndolo. Then the one who was called Ndolo, he had a battalion which he was heading. He had a battalion that he was heading. And so in 1964, as there was going to be a changeover in the East Africa from British Army, King's African Rifle to Kenya Rifle and so on, there was mutiny. There was mutiny in Zanzibar, where Field Marshal Okello, a Luo from Uganda, overthrew the Sultan of Zanzibar. He overthrew the Sultan of Zanzibar, and in Tanzania there was also a mutiny. In Tanzania there was a mutiny, but Nyerere used the British Army to conquer them. There was also a mutiny that 1964 in Uganda, and Kabaka of Uganda, who was the president, it was called Kabaka Edward Mutesa. He was the president, and the prime minister was Newton Milton Obote. They used the British to fight off the mutiny. In Kenya, there was also that mutiny, and Jomo Kenyatta used the British to fight off the mutiny. Now, when he used the British to fight off the mutiny, the soldiers who were affected were court-martialed. The African soldiers, the Kenyan African soldiers who were involved in the mutiny were court-martialed. Now, when they were conducting this court-martial, Mulinge was very busy deputizing Brigadier Hadi. So the work of the court-martial fell on a commanding officer of a battalion called Ndolo. Ndolo did the court-martial, and President Jomo Kenyatta was happy about Ndolo. What the president did was to promote Ndolo to the rank of full colonel, full colonel. So when Ndolo was made a full colonel, it meant that they were changing positions. Ndolo was now deputizing Brigadier Hadi, and Ndolo's previous battalion was taken over by Mulinge. Mulinge never forgave Ndolo. So that was 1964. 8 years later, 1972, there was an attempted military coup where Professor Pius Omamuga was involved. This was mostly Luo-Kamba connection, but I'll concentrate on Kamba on this step. So the Chief Justice, Justice Kitili Mwendwa, was involved. The MP for Yatta, Gideon Mutiso was involved. Ndolo was involved, among others. So Ndolo approached. By then, Hadi had gone, and Ndolo had been made the army commander, a major general. The Navy and the Air Force were now a bit more developed. So, President Kenyatta had introduced a rank that was called, a position, not a rank, position that was called Chief of the Defense Forces. The Chief of Defense Forces was to be the overall. Now, Major General Ndolo was the Chief of the Defense Forces, while Mulinge was now a colonel, a brigadier. Ndolo was a major general and chief of the Defense Forces, CDF. But Mulinge was now a brigadier and a deputy army commander. Then he was approached by Ndolo, where he was told that they were planning to overthrow the government. He silently went and told Jomo Kenyatta. Remember, he was still bitter with Ndolo overtaking him. So he went and told Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, and the whole issue was nabbed in the bud. Then Kitili Mwendwa and Ndolo were made to resign, but in military terms, resigning would have caused a problem. You may discover that many military people, especially those in the higher positions, once they retire, they are usually given other jobs. Like Kibwana, who was the chief of general service, he was taken to be the KPA manager. General Kianga, who was the chief of general staff, was taken to Kenya Railways. They don't just retire that way. And again, senior police officers with gadget patches on their shirts are allowed to retire with their uniforms. Even army officers with gadget patches on their sleeves, they are allowed to go with uniforms to their home. Actually, with the military, you retire with your rank. You will still be called colonel, brigadier, or even general, so and so. So, Ndolo being sacked would have caused problems with the soldiers. Soldiers would have overthrown the government. So he was retired silently. But he would go around wearing the military uniform and telling people, "Munafikiri nimefutwa kazi, mimi bado niko hivyo." Then Mulinge silently went and talked to the president, and the president called Ndolo. Whatever they talked, Ndolo never did whatever he did. But I'm told there's a place called Kwandolo, Ndolo's Corner. He was given a large shamba, thousands of acres. As we speak now, squatters are having problems with his family. So Mulinge became the army commander. The position of chief of defense forces was scrapped. The Navy fellow reported to the commander-in-chief, the Air Force, and also the Army. Of course, in Kenya's history, even today, being called Minister of Defense is just ceremonial. So that is the 1972. Gideon Mutiso was jailed for 9 years, but later, after coming out of jail, he was again re-elected several times as the MP for Yatta. Then 1982, military coup. That one everybody knows. But Moi allowed the military coup to happen because he wanted to purge off people and use that as an excuse. I'm shocked because I used to work with the intelligence that we have cases where even intelligence officers, special branch, would enter military camps to go and arrest military people. Of course, I joined the intelligence after the coup, but we were always told that anything to do with intelligence, with the military intelligence, we usually handed over to MIC, Military Intelligence Corps. But nowadays, I hear it is called DMI, Directorate of Military Intelligence. So I don't know why it was being allowed. And then there was this case about the Major General Kariuki, who was the Air Force commander. There was a Nyeri show where he had even whispered to Mulinge and told him, because the president was around, he told him, can you remind the president about the impending coup? And Mulinge told him, "You are chana na hiyo." But later, What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that the military coups brought out the true picture of Mulinge, which very few people know, that he could sell anybody if it benefited him. Later on, Moi reintroduced the rank of Chief of the Defense Forces, but called it Chief of the General Staff. Now with the Chief of General Staff, he was to be overall, and he did not head the army. That is when it was, nowadays the Chief of General Staff is called Chief of the Defense Forces. That is the little that I have.